The Zambia that KK wanted to see?
I will say yes and no. And I will say yes because we at least are governing ourselves to some extent. We're able to enjoy certain freedoms that may have not been enjoyed in the colonial era. But I will say no because I think there's a lot of disunity, there's a lot of hatred, and I think there's a lot of prioritizing selfish needs above the need of the greater good of everyone in Zambia and the community. So yes and no. And I think it's sad because it's more of the no side. Because when you look at the political violence that has been going on, when you look at the levels of corruption, when you look at how in many ways our culture has deteriorated, I think it can be quite saddening as a person that fought for the liberation of Zambians to see people begin to tear each other down.
All right, you talked about the freedoms that we're not enjoying at the moment, and we did enjoy. And of course, these are the freedoms that you're claiming and saying that KK wanted us to enjoy. What freedoms did we enjoy in the old days of 1960s?
I think maybe you maybe didn't hear what, or maybe the way that I phrased it. I was saying pre-colonial, there are certain freedoms we didn't have pre-colonial that we have now. So, for example, people needed passes to move, and we can now move freely. So there's certain freedoms that he fought for, which we're able to enjoy now. Yeah.
And you did mention of some that we're not enjoying at the moment. You talked about the Kwacha not doing well. You've talked about quite a few things, but just outline for me the things that we have, we're enjoying at the moment now that you feel, okay, at this particular time, there's so much effort that has been done, and this is at least what KK wanted to see.
So like I said, for example, we have a certain aspect of freedom of movement that we might not have had when we were colonized. We have the power to make our own laws, govern ourselves. We are currently in an election period. People are able to vote for the people that they feel should govern them. And I feel like pre-colonial, this was not possible.
All right. Now, of course, this legend has passed on, and it's quite sad on the 17th of June. But how best can we mourn as Zambia this legend that did fight for the freedoms that you're talking about now?
I think one of the best ways we can mourn is to begin to embody his views and his legacy. Because I think it is rather insulting if someone fought and sacrificed so much for us to get to a point where we have leaders that are spewing hatred and telling people to not vote for people on account of tribe, or to be hateful towards other people on account of tribe, when one thing that Kaunda stood for was one Zambia, one nation. And he unified this country. He had deliberate policies where he would send people to work in places that were not the place they originated from, just to ensure that there was a mix and to sort of begin to melt away these tribal lines and these tribal barriers. So another thing that was very important to Kaunda, which is also important to me as a young person, is Pan-Africanism. And you can see how he was a very key part of funding a lot of the colonial movements in different countries, because Zambia attained colonialism a lot earlier. He created a haven. Zambia was a haven for a lot of the freedom fighters in the different parts of Africa. So I think this is something that we need to embody as a generation and take up the mantle of Pan-Africanism. Africa cannot be great unless Africa stands great together. And we need to take on this fight of working together as people in Zambia, but also people across Africa, to change the narrative that Africa has.
Yeah. There's this issue of, realizing it is a campaign period, and it is a period where we're heading towards the elections, and different political parties are using different strategies, some which are not recommendable, because we're mourning a founding father, someone who is so special to us, and we see that others are still going on with the campaigns, and are still involving themselves politically. What's your say in that, as a youth who is so keen about Zambia's growth and Zambia's image? Is that right?
I think in terms of I think it's important to honor our founding father's memory, and it's important to honor his legacy. Yeah. And you were talking about people campaigning using wrong methods. So, for example, we have people that are using the divide and conquer. So you are dividing groups of people, dividing them across party lines, or dividing people across tribal lines, so that you can now conquer these people. Because instead of these people actually interrogating, what message do you have? What have you done in the past few years? And these people are fighting one another, and they're confused. I think that's for me even worse than campaigning during the mourning period, because ultimately you are disregarding this person's legacy and the contribution that they put into having the Zambia that we have today.
All right, and there could be a better way of really mourning our founding father. All right, let's talk about love, unity, peace, which were the fundamental pillars of Keke's legacy and his campaign. Are we living to these principles of life?
I would again say yes and no, because I think as Zambians we have developed the reputation of being a peaceful people, and for the most part, we are peaceful. But if we look at some of the images that are coming out of this election period, like let's take Mpulungu, for example, where people are being hateful towards each other simply because of difference in ideology or difference in the chitenge that they're wearing, or whatever differences. To me, it's very hard to justify that. And, having also gone through the encounter where we, for example, have had party members who have been attacked by our fellow opposition, it doesn't embody peace and love and unity. Like as you said in your preamble, you were talking about how he continually emphasized the importance of loving one another. We're not loving one another. And I want to speak specifically to unity, because I believe that unity is a fundamental ingredient in our development as a country. And I will not believe any leader that comes to me and says they have a developmental agenda, or they want to push Zambia economically forward or anything, if they do not speak about unity and embody those principles. Because the truth of the matter is we need to work together as Zambians in order to get to a place where we are developed. But how will you develop when you are fighting your ally? It doesn't make sense.
All right. Now, the issue of course, I'm still on the unity and the peace. There's so much tribalism that we've seen, regionalism, and the issue of political violence that we've already tackled on. Where have we gone wrong? Who's to blame? Realizing that, you are a youth who's keenly observed the electoral period, and even before that, you are so keen in trying to see how the elections ahead of August will be. But who's to blame really for the not upholding Keke's legacy? I
think it's a multi-dimensional problem. Chola, we have a leadership problem in this, not problem, a crisis. We have a crisis of leadership, and we have not had good leadership in this country for a very long time. So that is reflected in different things, like, for example, our education system. Who runs our education system? Who is this education system fashioned on? When you look at it, it's remnants of a colonial structure which teaches us to hate ourselves. And when we hate ourselves, we now begin to hate each other. We are the generation that needs to fight the war within ourselves, where we hate ourselves, which causes us to hate our fellow person, and ultimately is the reason why we are not developed. Until we fight this war we have with ourselves, hating each other, hating ourselves, it's going to be very difficult for us to develop, because we don't have allies. We hate our allies. Another thing, like I said in the beginning, the leadership. This hatred is coming because it's a top-down thing. We have leaders that are telling us as young people, that are telling the party structures that we should be hateful towards one another. One of the things that I have had in Narib, for example, since when I first joined 6 years ago, I was told point blank period, we are not a violent party. When we criticize, we also offer solutions. So there's a certain tone that was set for me by the leadership that was there at the time, and even the leadership that we have now as Stephen Urenda. So the leadership is the reason behind a lot of this hatred and us not honoring President Kaunda's legacy of love, peace, and unity. Another thing is, I'll also blame it on ourselves. What are we doing? You know, we're so, the government has a huge role to play. I 100% agree. But how are we governing ourselves and governing our communities? Why are we allowing people to be hateful to one another and not do anything about it? We need to begin to hold our leaders accountable. And we need to do this aggressively. If you see a certain leader in the media speaking hate messages, speaking tribal messages, we need to get to a point where we don't give those people our votes when it comes to August 12th, because we are taking a stand, a strong stand. There's no way that we can prioritize maybe personal favors we're getting for these people and whatever at the expense of the unity and the sanctity of our nation.
All right. Now you've talked about the youths as well being in the forefront, trying to resolve this issue of upholding KK's legacy, but of course realizing also that the fact is youths are the ones who are the ones on the underground, you know, being able to hoard those blocks, guns, and whatever vices that they're using to foster, political violence. But also realizing that it's a trickle-down effect from the leaders to the youths. But how do we, realistically speaking, solve this issue? Yeah.
I will go back to what I said, the leadership crisis. We need to change our leadership. We need leaders that will embody peace, love, and unity. And when they embody that, they'll be able to direct these young people. Because the truth of the matter is, a lot of these young people that are taking up these arms, fighting one another, they are pawns. They're just pawns in a game, and they're instructed, and they're given different incentives. Another thing that we need is we need to ensure that we give these young people the dignity of employment, the dignity of a good education, the dignity of things that are going to put value, where they're going to place value in themselves, and they're going to realize, no, why is it that you are not giving, you have a stronghold in this province, you are not giving me a seat there as a young person to be a member of parliament, but instead you want me to take up a panga and go and beat someone else. When we place value in ourselves as young people and determine what it is we are going to do, there's going to be a difference. And also, when we place value in ourselves, to get to a point where we also hold our leaders accountable. Our leaders need to be held accountable because they're ruining the future of the young people. We have, if we're going to follow chronological order, we have a lot more time on this earth than they do. But meanwhile, they're destroying the Zambia that we know today. They're destroying the peace. They're destroying KK's legacy. A lot of them grew up in a generation where they had free education. They're not even providing that for us. So we need to take a stand against this, and we also need to introspect as Zambians and say, what are we standing up for in this election? What are we standing up for as our Zambian legacy?
All right, you talked about free education, and of course, realizing now at the moment that things are changing. In the old days, we did have our grandparents and parents who did benefit from free education from, grade 1 to university. They got that education for free, and it came with quite a lot of meal allowances and not actually meals, not meal allowances. Meal allowances came after that, but it came up with meals and fully packaged. And if you look at it now, comparing to where we have come from, education is quite expensive. It's quite competitive as well. Who do we blame? Really, that things are changing at the moment, because things are becoming things are dynamic at the moment. Who do we really blame in terms of the education system of not upholding KK's legacy?
I will blame the leadership. I will blame firstly the leadership because
we're still blaming the leadership.
Yes, because they got the leaders some of the leaders that we've had between KK's time and our present leadership have been greedy, and they've been selfish, and they've not prioritized key elements. And there's so many things that we can blame it on. We can look at the structural adjustment programs in the 90s under Chiluba, and there were so many things where there were these policies that entailed that some of these things had to be adjusted and to be changed. However, I find it hard to believe that we did not have money to spend on our education system when there was money that some of these leaders were able to pilfer and to steal and to divert towards their personal benefit. Yeah. Our issue in Zambia is not a lack of resources. Our issue is a lack of resource management, and in addition to selfishness and just leaders wanting to take more for themselves than to give to the Zambians as a whole. Under an Arab government, we guarantee free education from grade 1 all the way to university, because we will be managing the resources correctly. We will be prioritizing the right things within the governance system.
I have a few questions on that one, but I don't want us to stray away from from the topic of KK's legacy, because I wanted to ask how are you going to do that, but that's another issue for another day. Let's compare the one-party state and multi-party democracy, which KK did allow, after seeing that there was so much pressure from Chiluba. And, if you compare these two, people would say, a lot of people have said multi-party democracy is really not fostering quite a lot of development. It's not fostering sustainable development, and we were better off in the KK days where we had our own companies. We had, it was proudly Zambian, and everything was owned by Zambia. Would you agree as well?
I would not agree entirely. Yeah. And it's because there's also certain things that we can criticize the late over the way that things were run within a multi-party state. What I will say is, let us learn from our history correctly. Let us take what was good, take that, and let go of what was bad. So what you can also see, for example, from KK was he didn't inflict his will on the people. When the people wanted the multi-party democracy, he gave it to them. And again, one of my criticisms of the type of economy, opening up the economy under Chiluba, was we entered a system, a world economic system that we did not necessarily understand. And it goes back to one of the narrow ideals of Zambia for Zambians. We, as a country that was not ready, I heard this analogy from a friend. We came from a history of being colonized. We're still a very young country. And then they put you in a race against other nations that have had, have had liberation or have not been colonized at all. And you have to compete in this global economy. So you're coming as a nation that was shot in both your legs. And then you have to run the same race under the same conditions. It just did not make sense. So there's a lot of things that were also a problem with opening up the economy and the multi, because I think let's also not, let's distinguish between the opening up of the multi-party state from an economic perspective and also from a governance perspective, because those are two things. But I think in a nutshell, what I will say is, we also need to reconsider the democracy that we have as at now. Do we maybe need to transition into a more proportional representation system, or do we keep things as we? Let's interrogate. We might not have all the answers, but let's ask the right questions. Yeah.
All right. Now, you did talk about the economic aspect and the governance aspect. I want us to break it down and what you really mean when you say there's a difference between the two. Yeah.
So, for example, you were talking about the opening up and the multi-party democracy. So there was multi-party democracy from a single state, sort of dictatorship kind of thing. So the thing with my greatest criticisms of dictatorial systems is the absence of checks and balances. But you move towards this multi-party system, and ideally, you should have, under a democratic system, an independent judiciary, an independent legislature, and an independent executive. And the point of all of these three is to provide checks and balances to one another. Under a dictatorial system, sometimes that just might be ceremonial, and that doesn't happen. So that's, in a nutshell, the the governance side and the governance policy side. Then there is the more economic side, where we came from an economy that was protected. So everything that was manufactured here was a priority. It was the things that I was not alive at the time, but it was the things that they used. We had cars produced in this country. We had textiles. We had all of these industries, which we do not have today. And what happened post-1991 is we begin to become a more import-centered country, because we are now taking on these neoliberal systems, and it seemed justifiable at the time, but let's fast forward to 2021 at present. Are we better off? Are we producing? What are we really producing? We're importing all the cars. We're not really producing textiles. Can we truly say we're on the path to development if we are not even having enough Zambian produce?
Yeah, and I think that was the aim of KK. He wanted to see Zambia prosper by itself, but at the moment we find that even the time that we did have an onion shortage, when we banned, import from other countries, we scrambled for the onions.
Exactly. And,
yeah. And this is what I'm asking you to say: are we really achieving the legacy of KK that we wanted to see, that Zambians should be able to produce this in this particular time? But when we opened up, Zambia, things went. We had so much competition from the foreigners, and even at the moment now you find that foreigners are much doing well than the local Zambians, which wasn't the legacy of
Exactly, and it goes back to the analogy I gave you earlier, is we were shot in both legs. We were not coming from equal footing with these people that we were made to compete with. And it goes back to something that we'll always reiterate under NAREP, is Zambia is for Zambians. So let's prioritize producing in Zambia, let's prioritize buying Zambian products, let's prioritize building Zambia as Zambians. Let's not wait for someone else to come and give us aid. No, let us finance our own development.
What do you think of Zambians voting on the basis of change and not ideology? Because if you compare it from the time of KK, people want to change, all right? If we compare it to the other leaders, every government that has changed was because the people want to change and not really reading the ideologies that they're fostering towards the Zambian people. What do you think of youth's majority? Because you're youth, and the majority of the people that vote in leaders are the youth.
I think it's dangerous, honestly speaking, because change is not always a good thing. And Zambians should look at, let's just say our past transition from the MMD government to the current government. People at the time when they voted, they were voting for what? They were voting for change. But they didn't, I don't know if they took into account that maybe the change might not be positive. And that is something that I would implore young people right now. Take time. We all want change. It's crazy that the dollar is now at almost 23 kwacha. $1 to 23 Zambian kwacha. It's just crazy, right? And we want that to change. However, are we actually interrogating the true intention and the heart of the leaders that are promising us a difference? Are we truly interrogating their ideology, how they are going to do things? We were once promised more money in our pockets. But when we look at our pockets today, we're not the ones who have more money. The cadres are. Is that the change that we wanted? So change is change is a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing.
Let me just hold it there. I did interview someone coming from the CSOs in the afternoon on the election watch. And of course, he said the economy is doing well. People are at the malls. There's so much infrastructure development, and that's the legacy that KK wanted to see, a Zambia that is full of development, and that's what we're seeing at the moment.
I find that quite funny, because when you say people, yes, we have people at the malls, but when we look at the percentage of the Zambians at the malls, how many people are at the malls? How many Zambian people can walk into ShopRite, can walk into any store and truly leave and have bought a decent amount of groceries? How many people? Yes, there's infrastructure development. Yes, some critical roads have been built. Well done.
Isn't that
But
the
I
Zambia
asked,
that
no,
KK
I asked the question,
Yeah.
at what cost? KK fought to liberate us from colonial rule. We are neo-colonially indebted to people because of the roads that are being built. So when we're talking development, we also need to ask, at what cost? When you look at our debt to GDP ratio right now, it is scary because we are in so much debt. And it makes you, if you just bring it to a domestic level, right? You have a salary of 100 kwacha or 1,000 kwacha. Why are you going to get a loan worth 1 million kwacha? When are you going to pay it back? And for me as a young person, it is aggravating because it is me and it is my offspring that are going to have to pay back these debts, and we're going to have to feel the brunt of the burden. So we are happy that there's infrastructure development. However, when we look at the contracts, and a lot of these things are overinflated. And on top of that, I will keep asking, at what cost? Who do we owe? Because I would rather not have some of these things and truly be free and not be indebted to people that, and for me, what is also upsetting is if we correctly managed this country, if we invested in our agriculture sector, if we ran the mines correctly, we are so rich in this country. Why do we need to go and take a loan? We just need to correctly manage the resources that we have. Zambia is too well endowed with resources for us to be in debt to the extent that we are. It's just ridiculous, if you ask me. And it's also embarrassing. And to take it back to KK's legacy, he did not fight to get us to be free, just for us to go and be under the rule of another colonizer in a different way because we cannot manage our debt.
All right, now KK has been recognized world over due to the immense works that he did to several nations. How much value did we see in this man when he was alive?
I will say I think to some extent, we really did recognize him. But just to some extent, like we all knew he was the father of the nation. Even some of us who were born long after he was president, we knew about him, and we gave him the true recognition and all of that. But I feel we didn't value him enough to deliberately embody his ideals and some of the things that we stood for. He made, when you look at I look at my parents' generation, for example, the type of patriotism they have towards Zambia and towards serving their country is quite different from what my generation and the generations coming after have. And it's because we have not correctly embodied it. And we sort of made him more of a symbolic figure rather than someone that we should have looked to more, whose example that we should have begun to inculcate in our own lives.
So we do not follow his example of one Zambia, one nation. We're saying that, we've included the Ministry of Religious Affairs and National Guidance that helps us to live in one Zambia and one nation with values and principles that are in the Zambian Constitution and Article 8.
So your question is, you feel like the Ministry of National Guidance is...
Yeah, don't you feel that's an effort to live up to KK's legacy?
I guess maybe because this ministry was recently introduced. I think it's only been in existence for maybe the past 5 years.
Yeah.
Maybe it might be too soon to tell, but currently I think, for me as a young person, the only time I seem to hear anything from this ministry is when there's an issue to do with homosexuality or to do with indecent dressing. So I would like to hear more of their voice when it comes to these things like embodying our national values and which go beyond just dressing. Is how am I treating you as my neighbor? How do I feel about political violence? How do I feel about corruption? How do I feel about accountability and all of these things? This is something that I would like to see more from this particular ministry.
And of course, that was just one example that I did mention, but don't you think there's been so much effort from the time that KK left office up to now in trying to unite Zambia. We've seen that the current president has condemned political violence in so many ways and has called up to everyone to be a patriotic Zambian. Yeah. One would say there's so much effort.
It depends on how you define effort.
Yeah.
So, for me, I think I would like to wake up to a news headline to see that, because when you look at political violence headlines, it's usually the PF and the UPND. And I would like to, and I don't know what happens in the intra-party structure, whether the people that are involved in the violence get disciplined and things like that. But I feel like I would like to see more practical things from our president when it comes to ensuring, because for me what that says is that the people in his party don't listen to him. It says that they're disobedient to him. If he goes out and he publicly declares that we should not be violent, and then the people in his party don't listen to him and disregard him, and that the very people participating in violence, that, to me, is quite a cause for concern.
But it communicates to every Zambian, including
and
the
that's what I'm saying, like,
yeah.
it's to every Zambian.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, when we look at the headlines, we usually see it's either PF attacked UPND or UPND attacked PF.
Yeah.
So in the instances where PF might be guilty or might be participating in this electoral violence, does it mean they're not listening to not only the president of the nation, but also their party president? For me, that's a cause for concern, because it's the tone on what goes on in a party starts at the top.
Yeah.
So should we be made to believe that when he comes out to the nation, it's just ceremonial, and maybe in the party there's different directives going on? Or is there a bigger problem within the intra-party structure of that political party, and the cadres are just doing as they please, they cannot be controlled, and they're just fighting with other people from other political parties? That's a question. For me, it's a cause for concern. So I think it's one thing to come out and say something, but I feel like it's a completely different thing to embody it.
Yeah.
So I'll end there.
Let's look at what more we would have done as a country to appreciate KK while he was alive.
That's an interesting question. I think maybe it would have been nice for us, especially the younger generation that didn't grow up listening to his speeches on TV and stuff, like maybe to have seen more of him in the media, and maybe seen a lot more of those things run, and maybe not just seeing him on days like Independence and things like that. Yeah. I don't know, and I think I can't speculate. It would have also been good to have him take a very important advisory role of all, and maybe he did this, of all the governments and the presidents that have come before.
Yeah, he was open to counsel, and he did counsel.
Yeah, so yeah. I think maybe that's what I would say to that question.
And who's to blame for most of the youths or the people that do not know about KK? You find that people who are born, after, let me just say, from the time that MMD was in power, most people don't know much about our founding and first president. Who's to blame? It's the education system?
I think a part of it is the education system,
yeah.
And maybe a part of it is there was quite a bit of decampaigning of his wrongs that happened, because I think all leaders have their strengths and their weaknesses. So I think he might have been decampaigned quite a lot post 1991,
yeah.
And I think also maybe our family structures.
Yeah.
Maybe it's important for the people that were alive within the KK era to ensure that they let the people, the younger ones like us who were not alive when he was president, to, if they could give us like a more personal account of what he was like, and things like that.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into you as National Restoration Party. What are some of the pillars that you have in line to help maintain Zambia's unity?
Okay.
Yeah.
So for us, one of the cornerstone of our party is a heart for the people. So, and this heart for the people embodies love. It embodies unity. It embodies peace. It embodies caring for one another, loving myself as I love another person. Something else is the Zambia for Zambians philosophy. People like KK fought to have Zambia in the hands of Zambians. But when you look at Zambia today, who owns the large industries? Who owns the banks? Who owns the companies that produce seed and produce fertilizer? Who owns the key industries? It's not Zambians. And it's difficult for Zambians to thrive in a Zambia that they have little to no say in from an economic perspective. And I think also just being receptive to listening to Zambians and implementing things which will help Zambia as a whole.
All right. And are those the only pillars that you have as National Restoration Party?
No, we have a lot more.
Yeah.
But I think I'll limit it to those two. Yeah.
All right. So now, you're among the youths in Narep advocating for a different Zambia through Narep. Where do you want to see Zambia in the next 5 to 10 years? So
I definitely want to see a Zambia where there's something that President Stephen Nyirenda always says, there's no such thing as free lunch. So I'd like to see a Zambia that is not taking unnecessary favors and unnecessary donations from people. I'd like to see a Zambia in which the people take more responsibility towards developing the country themselves, and they're not delegating the responsibility of development to foreign nationals. We need to spearhead the development we want to see in this country. I would also like to see a Zambia in which we have a zero tolerance to corruption, because corruption is part of the cancer that has killed us as a nation. I'd like to see a Zambia in which we have free education for everyone from grade 1 all the way up to university. I would like to see a Zambia in which everyone that would want to participate in agriculture has access to free land, and in addition to that has as much farming inputs as they need. If you have a 1 hectare, you have enough seed, you have enough fertilizer for that 1 hectare. I would like to see a Zambia which is producing enough food for its people and has more than enough to export. I'd like to see a Zambia which has jobs for all Zambians. Every single Zambian has access to a job. I'd like to see a Zambia in which the key industries, the key cornerstones of our economy are being run by Zambia. And most of all, I would like to see a Zambia that is unified, a Zambia in which we work together to achieve this national agenda and to embody the one Zambia, one nation that Kenneth Kaunda fought for.
All right, you've talked about the food and the agriculture sector and the other, sectors that you would love to foster as Narep. Now, after Zambia's independence, we had 2 sectors of the economy, namely agriculture and mining sector, and now these 2 are no longer attractive. How does Narep intend to revamp these sectors?
Okay, so Narep, first of all, like one of the things that I mentioned, when we look at the seed that we plant, I'm a young farmer, for example. The seed that I'm using, it was not produced in Zambia. And this seed has to have fertilizers which were produced by either the company or a different company. And seed is such a critical thing because it can alter the biodiversity. You can literally control a nation, you can control a sector by just controlling the seed, by just producing the seed. So we are going to first of all ensure that we are producing seed which is tailored specific to the Zambian context. Seed, and we're going to have enough seed. We're going to provide agricultural inputs for farmers. In addition to that, we're going to ensure that these farmers have access to agricultural equipment, to agricultural specialists, to just anything that they need to have a thriving agricultural sector. We are going to provide free land for every Zambian who's over the age of 21 and intends to get into agriculture. We are going to, in addition to that, ensure...
How are you going to give free land to everyone above 20?
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you look at the Zambian constitution, for example, and there's a clause which talks about how land cannot be sold. So the land that is vested in the state belongs to the state, and people can use the land, people can develop the land, but land cannot be sold. So we have individuals currently who are in possession of huge amounts of land and have been selling that land. That is in contravention of the Constitution. Another thing is, under narrative, when we say Zambia is for Zambians, we have large parcels of land which are untouched and undeveloped because they have been set aside for tourism purposes. I strongly believe in using tourism as a economic activity and all of that. And we're not saying that we're going to get rid of national parks and whatever. However, there are certain parts of this country where a buffalo or a kudu or whatever has more access to land than a Zambian national. We have certain parts of this country where the foreigners have more access to the land or to the raw materials and that because of the injustice that is going on.
How are you going to make this sustainable? And realizing that, look, realistically speaking, you find that Zambia has more than 65% of people above 20.
Okay.
Yeah. And how is this going to be sustainable under?
So now, to go back to how I was saying, we're going to, first of all, ensure that we have mapped out the arable land that is available and the land that needs to be reclaimed from people that are in possession of it illegally and people that are prioritizing the use of the land, animal use of the land over the use of people, are put in check. And when you now have an account of how much land is available, you apportion the land. You have a plan on how to apportion the land sustainably. There's so many sustainable farming methods where you can use even a hectare and be sustainable. It is all about planning and leadership.
I'm still not satisfied with your answer. In the first place, you're talking about segregating the animal land purposes, isn't it? But that's what you're saying. You're going to get the use of the animal land use and give it to. So just briefly
at the risk
on
of
that.
you misconstruing what I said.
Yeah. So
I said we prioritize tourism and we are advocates of sustainable development. So there will be land apportioned for these animals. However, we're not going to we have an expanse of land more than those animals need to use currently. And we have people that are displaced and do not have access to land in their own country. And that is because of poor planning and poor apportioning of this land. That was my statement.
How are we going to ensure accountability on that strategy?
By having the right systems in place and having the right people leading these things.
All right, let's get to look at the aspect of that was agriculture. Now the mining sector.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with the mining sector, I think the starting point, if we were to make government, is to go in and do a thorough analysis, because look, it's easy to speculate on what the problems are, and with a lot of the problems, we do know what the problems are. So one of the things that we're going to do is first of all do a thorough analysis, and based on that, do a thorough plan. But one thing we are aware of is when you look at the way in which the mining sector is run, a lot of the proceeds of the mining sector go to people outside of the country. We as Zambians do not even have a proper taxation system where we have these foreign-owned mines. We're not even benefiting from them. So that's another adjustment. We need to look into creating the proper taxation framework for foreign-owned mines. And another thing is also getting possession of these mines and beginning to manage them in a way that is going to ensure sustainability for further generations, productivity, and ensure that Zambians have jobs, ensure that Zambians have access to the minerals.
Well, you're talking about getting possession of these lands. You do realize that there are contracts involved.
Definitely.
Yeah. How are you going to get possession of
So there is no one-way-fits-all for all the mines. But what I can tell you is this a key priority for our government to claim back possession, whether it's by buying back, whether it's by making deals, whatever it is. There's no one way fits all for each and every mine, because like you say, there are contracts. So it's also dependent on the contract and all of those things.
But of course, what if you find yourself in a scenario where you cannot get any of the mines? They don't want you to buy.
I highly doubt that.
They don't want you. No, this is realistically speaking. They're making money off it.
I think
we cannot deny that.
I think you're trying to push me towards a forceful claim back.
No.
Answer.
Look, you've clearly outlined to say you're going to ensure that you claim back the mines that we do have in Zambia and make money off it. But then do not forget that these mines have got their owners. They have got contracts. All right, and I just want to understand how you're going to clearly get back these mines that you've said that is your priority as now. So, and also, maybe just to add on that question, maybe clearly outline on what accountability systems you're going to ensure for both the mining sector and the agriculture sector when you give that land to the youths.
So, for example, maybe let's finish with the mining sector before we move to the agriculture sector. So, like I said, it's a case-by-case basis of the mines, right? Look into it, try the best amicable way. But also, there's, like I say, when we look back at the clause in the Constitution, there's a lot of these things in this country that have been repossessed, even in contravention of our Zambian, that are in possession of people, even in contravention of our Zambian Constitution. In addition to that, and I'm not claiming we are going to forcefully repossess these mines and some of these things. But, there's a lot of these things that have fallen into the hands of people who are not Zambians because of... for example, I can't simply come into your studio and take that and take possession of it. There has to be a proper system. And, there's a lot of things that we need to revisit over how some of these contracts are drafted, and that's why I will keep insisting it's a case-by-case basis. Now, to move on to the accountability structures for the agriculture sector, for example. So we've taken into account...
Let me just hold you there. So it's a 50-50 chance.
I'll say that it's more than a 50-50 chance.
No, it's a 50-50 chance.
And what are you basing your probability on?
Well, like what I've just clearly explained, the contracts to this, and like you've mentioned, there's supposed to be an agreement between you as the people who want to get the mines and what you're going to agree with the people that bought many years ago.
So I would disagree with you when you say it's a 50-50 chance, because I feel like even your probability is uninformed, because you also, let's say, are not privy to these contracts, and you're not privy to the possible loopholes that we might be able to.
But the fact is that
it's not. And this is why. And I agree, and I agree in the power of contracts. But you are trying to tie this to a 50-50 thing, and I know the answer you're trying to push out of me, but it's not going to come. But also,
I'm just trying to understand. Look,
but I think I will reiterate that it's a case-by-case basis. So if you want to give you like a specific answer, I can't say, because I don't have the contract sitting on my lap. But what I will say is we do have the full intention to ensure that the key economic industries are in the hands of Zambians. And we'll do our very best to ensure that we are smart about ensuring that happens.
All right. The accountability mechanisms and systems that you're going to put in place. Just briefly explain for me before we get into our last few questions.
Okay, so one of the flaws, for example, if I'm going to talk about some of the empowerment initiatives we've seen for the youth, we see that the word empowerment has been translated to mean money, right? So there's no way that, for example, you can give a youth free land, free fertilizer, and they do not even have any training, they do not understand. And one of the first forms of accountability is ensuring that the people that have access to this land, the people that have access to these farming inputs, are trained correctly. we have the intention and our education plan to come up with vocational schools, to come up with different forms of training to support the different industries that we would like to bring about. That's the first form. Number two is in the life cycle of a project, you need to consistently monitor these things to ensure you're getting a return on investment. We need to stop doing things chipante-pante in this country. We need to be methodical, and we need to be intentional about our planning and our leadership. So that is another element of the accountability. Another thing is because under NARIP, we will ensure that whoever is growing things has access to markets, either locally or internationally. Now, for these things to be suitable to be sold on the Zambian market and to be sold on the international market, there has to be a monitoring and there has to be accountability to ensure that they're being grown properly and things are being managed effectively. Another thing is having the right people in the right jobs. We're not going to give positions to people based on just merit or because you campaigned for us in the election. We need the people that understand what it is we are trying to do, what the NARIP product is.
All right, let's touch a bit about COVID. Of course, we cannot run away from the fact that we're in the new normal. We did have our face masks even as we were beginning this particular special interview, but the country is losing quite a lot of people from COVID-19. Public gatherings have been banned, of course, but how has this really affected you as a party, especially with regards to the pandemic? You know,
the COVID-19 crisis has been bad, and COVID-19 is real. You know, there's a lot of people in this country that believe it's a myth and believe all of these things about it, and we are seeing so many people die. And my sincerest sympathy to the families and the loved ones of the people that have lost someone to COVID. And the people that have had to endure it, because it's also a very unpleasant experience. And it's been quite odd as a political party having to go through what we thought was a traditional way of campaigning and having to readjust that during this COVID era to ensure the safety of both our members and the people that we are trying to target and appeal to with our votes. For us as a party, we are putting health as a priority, the health of our potential voters, the health of the people that will vote for us, the health of our members, the health of the people campaigning at the core of this. Because at the end of the day, there is a Zambia after the elections. We still have to live after the elections. And if we throw all caution out with the wind simply for this period because we are so focused on getting votes or trying to achieve whatever agenda we have during the course of the election, we're going to have to pay for it after 12th of August. We must not forget that we still need our people, our loved ones, to be alive after the 12th of August.
All right. Now, we have densely populated areas, like, for example, the markets, you know, and CBD, CDB rather, CBD. And, of course, bus stations are fully crowded, and you find that in the bus also there's no social distancing that is happening, and in the markets, in towns and different places, the malls, it's quite crowded. But how best do you think we can control this with the aspect of COVID-19?
I think
especially with the mindset of Zambians. Others believe it's a hoax. It's not happening. But we've seen people dying.
Definitely.
How can we control this?
And I think a lot of people might believe it's a hoax because maybe they might be asymptomatic, or maybe they might believe it's a hoax because they don't know anyone directly who has died from it. But I would like to implore the Zambians that it's real, and to the best of our ability, can we take into account these regulations that the government has given us, that the World Health Organization is advocating for, because COVID-19 is real and it's really impacting people. But there's also the other real aspect of, to tell you the truth, there's people that they can't afford to stay at home because they live hand to mouth. And in a situation where you have to go into the market and to sell and, you know, to do all of these things, because if you don't do that, you're not going to eat. So I think one thing that I would implore my fellow Zambians is, let's remember Ubuntu, and let's remember that we are affected. And I remember when the pandemic broke out here in Zambia, and there were very few cases that they were tracking them. There were certain cases that went to certain areas because someone was a driver for someone in another area, and it impacted us. So when you see that if you're being careless, your loved one could easily be impacted, and your carelessness could easily impact the life of another person's loved one. So to the best of our ability, let's think about that. But then I also like to implore the young people particularly, situations like COVID-19 are opportunities. Let us be creative and let us think of how we can restructure the Zambia and the economic environment as we know it. One of the things that have excited me is I've seen the rise in home delivery businesses, in people changing their business models and things like that. And it's one thing that I would like, because I might not have all the answers, but I would like to leave you with this. And every single day, start to think of how we could re-envision or how we could replan our everyday activities and how we could do it in a way which is safer to the next person and which is safer to us, and we can still make a living.
Realizing that KK did start just like you are in his early days, and of course even as a youth and as a young person, do you believe you're the next KK?
Do I believe I'm the next KK? I definitely believe that I am a young revolutionary and I'm going to achieve great things for my country. Yeah. I think I also don't like to necessarily copy and paste other people's legacies, but I think there's so many potent things that we can draw. I believe the generation that I am from, our challenge is to fight neo-colonialism and how we're still being colonized with aid and with loans and all. That is our struggle and that is our challenge. And I would like to be a key person in ensuring that we fight this particular thing.
All right, as we end this interview, and as we are heading towards the pause as well, the August pause, what is your message to the electorates who are ready to cast a vote on 12th August?
What I will say is just to take it back, to be reminiscent of KK's legacy. Yeah. I'm sure with the people that lived in his time, when he told them he was going to fight independence and we were going to get to a point where we would overthrow the colonial rule, many of them thought he was crazy. And it's in the same way when I am saying under a NAREP-led Zambia, we are going to have Zambia for Zambians, we are going to have jobs for all, we're going to have free education, we're going to have free healthcare. Yeah. To many people, it seems like it's just political rhetoric, or I'm even out of my mind. But I want to remind you that we should dare to be bold, and we should have enough confidence in our power as Zambians to develop this country. Because Zambia is for Zambians, and only Zambians will develop Zambia.
All right. Tinashe Mazala, thank you so much for coming through to
Thank
the
you for
special
having
interview.
me.
All right. We were discussing remembering KK's legacy with NAREP Youth Tinashe Mazala. And of course, thank you so much for watching the special interview on Muvi Television. Thank you so much to my producer and director, Mr. Innocent Piri. My name is Chisha Chola. Pleasant evening.
Thank you for giving me. Thank you for keeping me.
Music is a very powerful tool.
Dreaming away on a pillow of palms as we walk.
KK knew this and used